Are results, riding styles, race times and tactics different from the turf to the polytrack? And does this make a difference when deciding on your bets? Flat racing around the globe generally takes place on 3 different types of surfaces. Turf, which is the most common surface in Europe, Australia and here in South Africa. Dirt, which is the predominant track surface in the US. And all-weather or artificial or synthetic. These are collective terms for a number of different man-made surfaces used in many countries around the world today. As can be expected, the style of racing differs depending on the surface. Turf racing generally starts moderately before ending in a sprint down to the wire. Dirt racing tends to be run at a faster pace from the get-go, which can be seen when comparing times. And then there are the artificial surfaces, which tend to play out somewhere in between. Whilst we don't have any dirt tracks in South Africa, racing in the US is built on it. They're of the belief that it produces more predictable results, something that has great appeal from a wagering perspective. We did have a sand track at the Vaal, but it proved problematic, and in October 2015 the decision was made to lift it and replace it with turf. So while dirt racing clearly works in the US, it doesn't here. Their style of racing is different, and type of horse bred different as well. Be that as it may, turf racing is proven to be easier on a horse's body, resulting in longer racing careers. The deep grass not only cushions their stride, but there's also no kickback hitting those behind the leaders. Some horses are not affected by the state of the ground and are as effective in heavy going as on firm ground, but for most, the going does make a difference one way or the other. Race times also differ depending on the going, so if you're a clock watcher, make sure you're comparing apples with apples. The introduction of artificial or all-weather surfaces is, as the name suggests, an attempt to curtail the loss of race meetings due to weather. In South Africa, the polytracks at Greyville and Fairview are made out of silica sand and fibers, recycled carpet, spandex and rubber. The entire mixture is then covered with wax to bind it all together. It hasn't proved entirely successful, particularly in Durban with the high summer temperatures. Track temperatures can spike, causing the wax to melt, and all this means more maintenance and greater care. Do some horses prefer the polytrack over the turf and vice versa?
Definitely, I think so. Some tend not to enjoy the tracks. I think, it's a fine balance. You've got to actually look at your individual horses and sort of figure out which ones would prefer it, whereas some horses just don't act on it at all.
There's a couple of horses I've ridden, like O'Keefe. On the turf, she just doesn't seem to really... Yes, she's won on the turf, but Andre sent her down here preferably for the poly, and she's taken to it so well, and some horses do prefer it, and some horses do prefer the grass, just based on some of their actions and just the way they like to race, and also the surface. Sometimes grass is a bit more give, maybe the poly is a lot firmer, and depending how they lay it out on the day, but I think horses do prefer different surfaces, definitely.
As a jockey, are your riding styles different?
I would say yes. It also depends on the horse. I think with the polytrack surface, you kind of want a horse that's got a high cruising tempo and can still quicken, so that you can, hustle for position a little bit, give your horse a little save, and then fire away up the straight. So, yeah. But at the end of the day, I think all of this is just on the pace of the race. If the races are run fast, I think it gives every horse a chance. And sometimes we tend to want to go to the front, but we don't want to go fast. And I think that just messes it up a little bit. But I've noticed now the polytrack races have false rails, I think, which makes it a little bit more even.
Here in Greyville, from the turf to the poly, there is a bit of a different riding style, different tactics, because it's a different track. So you can be more confident on the grass. In saying that, you still ride a confident race on the poly. Just sometimes you have to just take into account if horses skip and all. Sometimes they don't stop on the poly, so you have to sometimes ride a different tactical race. And so there is a bit that goes into it. So you got to read your grass and poly form, obviously. And so it's, I would say the poly is quite tactical at Gravel, yeah, yes.
What advice would you have for punters when coming to understand the different racing surfaces when they're trying to decide on their bets?
Well, it's a tricky one. You know, I would probably look at draws. If you're gonna fancy a horse, and obviously if you're fancying it, you've been following it for a while, and if it's had run on that surface and it showed a little bit of ability but didn't have a good draw, then you can always see with a better draw. Depends on if there's going to be a hot pace. You know, these things are visible if you're a keen punter and you follow racing, you know, with great attribute. And yeah, so everything comes down to the right draw, the right kind of horse. If the horse is well, how close it's run to, you know, its racing pattern. You know, some race cards show you that there's a good history, like whether they've had 8 starts, and you can figure out a pattern and how many weeks apart they race, and some horses do like that. So sometimes what I find, if a horse is running on the poly track and they ran 2 weeks ago on the grass, those are the kind of horses to try and follow, because they race fit and they quicken better than.
The surface has nevertheless allowed racing to continue when turf meetings would have otherwise been cancelled due to rain.